Hello, everyone out there. This is the first ever Cartographer's Log Live. Thanks for coming. We got a nice crowd out there. And I am not, surprisingly, here to talk about how I was right about the Paramount Warner Brothers Disco Bros Rob Bonta court bottle. I'm here to talk about something very important to those out there who are cinema lovers, film lovers. It's called Letterboxd. It's a great community platform that's been around for about 15 years now, and it was founded by two young men about 15 years ago, Matthew Buchanan and Carl Van Rando. I think I'm saying his name right, although it sounds like I'm just saying some rando formed it. They sold 60% of Letterbox about 3 years ago to an investment platform called Tiny, who was really kind of just scooping up properties and putting them together under a big roll up. The valuation back then for the 60% that Tiny bought of Letterboxd was $55 million. And now Tiny is in deep financial trouble and they are desperate for cash, and they sense a moment in the AI hype bubble where they can cash in. So they're looking to auction off Letterboxd, and they're looking for a price of around $250 million for the platform. So 5x what it was paid for, what they paid for it just 3 years ago, to capitalize on the metadata. 30 million members, a billion diary and logging events, or just about that number on Letterbox of people who are in the community. So today we're going to talk about what Letterbox is actually worth, if it can avoid the fate of Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb or Box Office Mojo or Without a Box or any of the other tech platforms in independent film that had been sold off to big corporate media or big tech media. And I've got three amazing guests. I've got Lauren Seinfeld, who's a brand guru. I've got Ted Hope, who's a legendary film producer and film expert. And I've got Elizabeth Joyce, who is a social entrepreneur who's looking to buy Letterboxd for the community itself, take it into what's called a corporate responsibly a public benefit corporation. I apologize for bungling that. And do what something I've never heard before, because she invented the term exit to community and let the community run Letterboxd. So that's the background of the chat today. Thank you all for coming to the first ever Cartographer's Log Live. Let's bring our first guest to the table, Lauren Seinfeld, who is a brand expert who has worked at places like Heinz and for Ryan Reynolds around the Wrexham project that he is so famous for now. And Lauren, you have a platform called Get Mark that basically judges the value of a brand, the upside to it, the downside to it. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me on. This is a really exciting topic. Yes, exactly how you described it. I started my career on the Kraft Heinz side with brands, maximum effort. And, what I kept running into the same problem no matter where I was working, which is so many times the assets that are generating the most value for our company is things like formats and characters and rituals or cultural value often aren't on the balance sheet. I think it's wild 90% of S&P 500 value is in intangibles and 80% go unaccounted for. And so the biggest reason for that is simply because there's not an instrument to detect them. And so that's exactly what Mark is. We detect intangible assets, we map them, architect them, and then score them on 0 to 850, kind of like a FICO score.
And it's brilliant. You did it for my company, for eShap, and
Yeah.
for me personally. You did it live on stage at Stream TV in Denver with me. And I really, this live stream is a product of the advice that you gave us. A lot of the moves that we've made recently and that are coming up, we are reacting to your untapped brand value that you saw in my company. So I asked you to take a look at Letterboxd about a
Yeah.
month ago, and you came back with a really detailed report. What's your assessment of the value of the brand, the platform, the community?
Well, I think what's really interesting is if you just look at the discourse right now, film culture sees it as a community, PE sees it as an audience business, which makes a lot of sense. 30 million members, subscriptions, ads, both are absolutely true, but neither is really the full inventory. In fact, what we detected was pretty detailed. And again, illustrates the value that isn't on the balance sheet. So if I were just to like list it off, 94 owned assets, connected by 115 documented relationships, closing 8 self-reinforcing flywheels. What's really interesting though are those 8 flywheels are actually contributing both realized and unrealized commercial and cultural value to the business. What I wouldn't mistaken these assets for are features. These are things like the diary format, the 4 favorite rituals, the list architecture, the editorial voice. 14 assets the community actually invented and now are operating that are, again, are contributing increasing value to the franchise itself. But what's I think most significant are 3 streams sitting on top of all of that. One is the obvious, which you mentioned, it's the audience business. The second is a text corpus, the 143 million opinions that are being tracked. And then there's something incredibly valuable, the behavioral corpus. That's essentially 15 years of behavioral watching that no one else has been able to record. And I really think it's that last one, which is where the debate goes a little bit awry because,
Why is that?
yeah, sure. I think everyone sees the reviews, and we all see it. It's a cinephile social app. But to the data points that you just shared, in 2025 alone, Letterboxd recorded what it was like 898 million diary entries, 143 or roughly so reviews. I mean, that's roughly what, like six logs for every one review. So the primary action, the experience of Letterboxd isn't actually publishing an opinion, it's self-declaring a behavior. And that distinction really changes the comp quite a bit.
And changes it from what to what? By the way, just as a quick note, everybody watching, and thank you all for attending either on LinkedIn or Substack or YouTube. Please drop your questions. Will Kreth, thank you for your comment there. Drop your questions into the chat. We will get to them. I promise you. For Lauren, Ted, or Elizabeth. But you were talking about it. It changes the comp and it changes the value. You saw like there's a 50% untapped value. So you scored the platform using the mark score, which won't mean that much to everybody, but around 524 or something like that. And then the
Yep,
upside is another 50% on top of that. Why?
exactly.
Where does that come from? How does that articulate in your mind?
Yeah, so the score itself, 565 out of 850, but I think what you just pointed out, the markup, right? The delta between what the business is currently scored today versus where the unrealized value can actually go, assuming it's commercialized the right way. And that was the markup of 245. Now, the reason that it generates a different comp depending on what asset you're looking at in the business. Well, the audience is one thing, but the 2-part corpus, the text plus behavioral, that's something very different. I'll give you an example. One of my favorite movies, but just to pull it, Adventureland. This is a 17-year-old comedy, right? It's streaming on MGM Plus. That's it right now. Now, if you look at over the last 114 days alone, it's averaging 26 written reviews a day. No new
On
release
Letterbox?
on Letterboxd.
Really?
26 written reviews on average over the last 114 days. I think that's wild because there's no like re-release, no
No,
event,
there's no event. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's nothing. And so like the busiest day was just like statistically consistent with pure chance. That's wild to me. Now, if you look at IMDb over the same course of time, the 114 days, a total of 3 reviews. Rotten Tomatoes, 0. So what you're looking at is 2,354 to 3 to 1. So, what that starts to show is like this is not the output of a review site, right? Or a social
Right.
platform. It's really the largest self reported record of film watching behavior almost ever assembled, with I think I would describe it as an opinion and social layer on top of it. But most importantly, I think it's the answer to almost like the afterlife economy for film.
Yeah, and so you've got Lion Tree out there trying to gin up a bid for this, and the rumored bidding price is around $250 million,
Yeah.
$250 million. Do you think, based on these comps, based on this corpus, that that's a real valuation? Ted, who's about to come on and join us here, he calls that FOMO pricing. He believes that Lion Tree is out there basically telling people that this is the asking price and the bidding price, so that he can get more people to bid at that price or higher. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, before I give you what I would say like two verdicts and one refusal, I think my claim would be this isn't necessarily FOMO, it's NOMO. And the reason for that is because the scarce ingredient is time, right? And so time is almost like the one thing venture capital can't really buy. And what we're
And in
describing.
this case, you mean the time invested into building out this corpus?
No, well, I mean, time itself is like I can go build this platform, using AI tomorrow. So the actual product itself, like that's not the value. The value is the time it took, the 15 years of people recording,
To get
right?
to this point,
Behavior.
yeah.
And you can't make that up. I can't go back in time. So essentially, it's the only one like it that it actually has behavior recorded over the last 14, 15 years. People, what they've watched, what they've loved, and most importantly, how it made them feel, and then what they've rewatched. And so, I would say, just in terms of cash, like this brings us to the number. I think the industry is debating the 250. That to me, they're debating a point on the bottom band because the number price is exactly just one of the three streams that we detected. And that's the audience business, which actually is growing, right? Like there's something valuable there. But the two other streams, the text corpus is essentially priced at zero. Now, Reddit's language deals typically alone run from what, $130 million annually.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you have the behavioral corpus, the one thing that only converts inside, one of the right buyers who can actually execute it adequately. But I think the underwritable band buyer by buyer, I would say, is 700 million to 1.5 billion.
Wow.
I actually think the debate isn't the price, it's what's in the box, right? The price is set by the buyer because there are all different kinds of
Well, and
assets.
to your point, it really matters who buys it and what they do with it. Because if you look at what happened to IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes or Without a Box or Box Office Mojo or any of these platforms that had a community, had a corpus that was somewhat like this. The IMDb forum was really what made IMDb IMDb, and then
Yes.
Amazon destroyed it, and now it's just basically a phone book. Let's bring Ted Hope to the table here, since he's commenting in the in the comment section, and he's eager to come up here. Ted is one of the great film producers of all time, including Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Ice Storm, and just a talk about a corpus of film. Ted is one of the most legendary film folks out there. Ted, welcome to this. How
Thank
did you
you.
get? How
And,
did you get
and don't
involved?
forget Adventureland.
I
Since
was
Adventure.
I'm,
going to
you know,
do. It's my
Oh, is that
favorite.
why you chose Adventure? What a
Yes,
kiss ass you are. You are
that's one of
such a
my
kiss
favorite.
ass, Lauren. So Ted, how did you get involved in this conversation? Other than being a big fan of Letterboxd and being a film, expert yourself, how did you get pulled into this conversation?
well, I hope we have like several hours to discuss because mine goes way, way back. That answer. I'll
No,
do
we
the
do
short
not.
version. The,
Yeah,
sh-
give the
the,
short version.
the short version is, movies for all the pleasures I find in them are also capable of launching a multitude of businesses, right? Like everything that shows up can be extended outwards in different ways. And the engagement, that conversation can go on long for a good long time. But that's not what we do, right? We've had this incredibly inefficient business where, generally speaking, up until the last 10, 15 years, we had to tell everybody about a movie, even though only about 3% of the audience, with a potential audience, was interested in seeing movies, right? But we never do anything about it. And then when you look at the film, I would argue my film career has been defined by trying to make sure that the creators of the work benefit from the success of their work, right? And that means that, when in today's world, I believe that when our movie brings a new first user to a platform, you should have a piece of that lifetime value of that user, right? The most important streams on Netflix or Amazon are those first time users, right? That lifetime value is huge, but filmmakers never see it and the agents never even argue for it, right?
Well, that would
Film
involve them understanding how to do that, but let's put that aside
A
for
lot of them are quite smart and do it, and they're advising both sides, unfortunately.
yeah.
That However, you see bits and pieces of it. Right now, the filmmaker's imagination is kind of limited to the ownership of their IP, which has been, them being shut out of that has been a crime because it's not, if you're smart, you do like Ryan Coogler does and get it back in 25 years. I would argue you could own it from the very beginning, right? And there's ways to do that. But that's an individual film product, right? Why don't we think about like what could be the ecosystem builds that could allow filmmakers and film lovers to actually benefit from their own labor, interest, and engagement, right? 40 years, I've been wondering that question. 40 years, why don't we actually try to benefit from the structures that we build, right? Like if I encourage you, you can look at affiliate marketing, right? If I encourage you to go see a movie, should I get a little lift from that? Not necessarily money. I'm not always interested in that, but at least helping us build the thing.
Credits towards tickets, whatever it is,
Right.
right?
Or just enjoying life. We do deserve beautiful things. But instead, what we see happening is that folks that have amassed tremendous private equity and capital come in, build something, extract value, and we see what we now call enshittification. Thank you very much, Cory Doctorow. Um, take hold. Can't we have the opposite side way of looking at things? How can we use our engagement to build better things? And basically, I would say one person and one platform, I've seen that happen in 40 years. I've seen Letterboxd build for the benefit of the community, right? That will not be replicated. Lauren's totally right. And it's not just the time that went into it. They were so careful in their management to build it for trust and confidence for the community, right? But then one person comes along, Elizabeth Joyce, I didn't know her. I met her on Substack, and she was speaking about like, what if the community actually owned and got the lift from the benefit of the platforms? And around that same time was when Tiny announced that they were selling what we didn't think they were going to sell, and it was this beautiful community build that the Letterbox team um, had built, and generous enough to say the structure that I built, I'm going to build it so the community can own it. To me, that's such an incredible change in the way of thinking. And if we all thought about that, we wouldn't have debated. Isn't everyone listening to on the Parabrowns, illegal merge consolidation strategy, right?
Yeah, so I'm gonna interject here, Ted, because your Wi-Fi is getting a little glitchy here. But I think what you're saying is what Elizabeth's plan is to include the community, give them value back, and allow the filmmakers to accrue value from this as well. Now, it should be known that Lion Tree has started the bidding process out there. Apparently, Netflix, Sony, A24, and a couple of other bidders are involved in this. But that's where Elizabeth's and we've got a really interesting face on Ted frozen on screen here. Let's bring Elizabeth Joyce to the stage. Elizabeth is a screenwriter, a sociologist. What she describes as a social entrepreneur and the founder of Intrinsic Entertainment Collaborative, which Elizabeth, you're attempting to inject Intrinsic into the bidding process. And you've done a good job. You raised money on Kickstarter, was it?
So Seed and Spark, yep, for our legal
Yeah,
fund.
Seed and Spark, to get the initial funds to help you hire lawyers and really get the bidding process going. But this is not a Kickstarter campaign. This is something completely different from that. So, can you describe what your strategy is and how you think this is going to play out?
Sure, I would love to. So, as a public benefit corporation, we're able to combine the social mission and the profit and do both at the same time. I think that the reason the industry is dying is because it's positioned commerce and art as opposing forces. And in the current model, they're in opposition to each other. In our model, they're aligned. They pull in the same direction, and the fans are part of it. Everyone has the opportunity to participate in the upside by becoming an owner in our model. And that's what we spent a year building with Harvard before the sale was announced. So what we allow everyone to do is to participate, everyone who participates in value creation, which connects the audience directly to the art, then gets to participate in the upside. And that's what the intrinsic model allows, that doesn't just apply to one company. When we heard that Letterboxd was for sale, we knew that it was an opportunity to deploy our model at scale and create the most powerful ecosystem improvement the industry has seen in a generation.
Yeah, and once again, reminding everybody out there, and we've got a nice crowd here of about 100 people. Please put your questions and comments into the chat so Jesse, our producer, can funnel them to us. What did you build with Harvard? That's a part of the history I don't know that I actually focused on too much until just now.
Yeah.
So you were building this, what you called public benefit corporation model at Harvard, with the Kennedy School there, I'm assuming, or
With the law school.
okay.
Yeah.
And what it so how long have you been working on that before this all came about?
So I'd been working on this model for 2 years. And the reason I was doing it, so Ted was kind enough to say before, sort of come in with this model. And what I'm doing is operationalizing the sentiment that has existed in this industry for decades, right? This is what the unions do. This is what the artists have talked about. And what's been missing is the operational piece. So I decided to take that sentiment that has been in this industry forever and operationalize it. So I went to Harvard and I said, what we need to do is give investors an exit path that isn't just to private equity or IPO, because that's where the misalignment happens. The misalignment happens when the business's entire function and focus becomes, who are we exiting to and how, right? When all they're trying to do is create a business that a private equity company can come in, buy low, monetize, and sell at multiples, right, to some next buyer or acquirer. And so the important thing here is that I created this thing called the exit to the community. And what that means is that you utilize equity crowdfunding as an exit strategy instead of just a startup capital strategy. And the reason it really matters is because when you are building a business, as soon as you take any sort of outside investment, you start optimizing for what those investors need to get out of their investment. In all cases, even when they have great intentions, they need an exit if they're doing it as an investment
Well,
rather than.
let's sit on that for a second, because Tiny literally positioned themselves as the perfect partner for Letterbox. I'm going to read Matthew Buchanan's quote from a letter that he issued when Tiny bought into the company in the first place. He said, "Tiny's model: long-term ownership, founder autonomy, no pressure to flip the company in 3 to 5 years, fit perfectly with our vision." And right now on Tiny's website, tiny.com, it literally says we leave the company alone, the founder alone. We don't get involved. We're not looking to flip the companies we're buying. And yet here they are flipping the companies. And so, Ted, when you talk about enshittification, you brought up Without a Box during our original conversation, but there are tons of other. I mean, Amazon bought IMDb, got rid of the forums, got rid of all the chats between the consumers, the trivia questions, and all that kind of stuff. And now it's just a listing site. Box Office Mojo, Amazon also bought that, put all of the data behind a paywall so that students and educators and filmmakers and journalists can't access it. Is that what you're fearing in the case of, let's say, a Netflix or a Sony or an A24 buying this platform? What do you think might happen to it if someone other than Elizabeth gets their hands on it? Oh, you're on mute.
That's exactly it. 5 years, the platform will be a pale glimmer of what it is today if private equity is in control. That we see that every single time. This is the era of shareholder capitalism, not stakeholder. What they've built on Letterboxd is the community, and the community deserves the right to have those benefits. Just like when we make a movie, we deserve the right to share in its success and all the data it generates. And yet we don't have that. It speaks of the need of something even bigger, like an artist bill of rights, but we'll save that for another day.
Well, we
You know,
might get back to that. But Elizabeth, okay, so you raised
I
let's
have
say,
an analogy I think that matters
go for
here
it.
in terms of talking about what's going to happen. Like, what is Letterboxd? Who are these people involved? And what I think is going to happen that I think matters. And Lauren laid this out exquisitely in business terms. And I'm going to lay it out in layman's terms, right? And in layman's terms, 15 years ago, two guys from New Zealand who loved movies, right? Here's the analogy. They went and they saw this beautiful community garden and they love the community garden, and there was a plot of land next to it, and they started cultivating that land and they built a farmer's market. At that farmer's market, everybody that loves the community, the people who do the growing at the community garden, the people who enjoy looking at it, who take pictures of it, everyone gets to come together at that farmer's market. And there's a dynamic interaction that happens between the growers, the fans, right? Everyone has a dynamic interaction at this market. Tiny comes along and says, "This is cool. We'd like to own it." And the Letterboxd founders say, "Well, it's really about the community, right? What independence matters to us. Being able to focus on the community matters to us." And Tiny says, "Yeah, of course. We're going to let you keep doing that forever. There's no pressure to flip. There's no pressure to flip. There's no auction. None of that will happen. You can believe us because we put it on our website." And the Letterboxd founders are like, "Great, that sounds awesome. We'll have the capital that we need to invest in this to make this even better." And so for 2.5 years, right, Tiny says on their website, there's no pressure to sell in 3 to 5 years, which remains true because it's 2.5. So at 2.5 years, they've come in and they've said, the value of all of the dynamic interaction that's happening at this farmer's market is $250 million. That's the value of all this interaction. And I agree with them about that. That's correct, right? I agree with Lauren. I agree with them. I think that is the value of what's happening there. The problem is Tiny doesn't own the interaction. Tiny owns the plot of land that the interaction happens on. And you talked before about all of these other platforms and what's happened when they've been acquired and how they've been enshittified. And that's because the technology is not the moat. The technology has never been the moat for any of those platforms. The community is the moat. And if you let the community wither and die on the vine, there's no more value. And so in this particular case, we are coming in with a new business model. As I said before, the reason the industry is dying here is because there's an extractive model that says, you grow stuff, we're going to extract, and incentives are not aligned in any of the parties that are creating the value. Our model aligns incentives for all of the people creating value, the artists, the fans, and the investors. And it allows them to participate in the upside as well because of the community ownership model. And that's what's going to change Hollywood. That's what's going to actually save an industry that we all love and care about, regardless of where we're coming from. If it's the indie space, if it's the studio space, right? The studio space needs new models too, because for the past 2 decades, they've been prioritizing this tentpole IP strategy, right? That is the concept behind it is that they're de-risking their investments. At the end of the day, that is actually all incorrect. Those are incorrect assumptions. There is no more mass market, monolithic, hegemonic culture of of opportunity where they're applying a venture mentality of saying we're going to invest, $300 million and it needs to make 800 million in order for us to return an investment. That is the riskiest play, as opposed to tapping into the subcultures that exist, that if you serve them, if you treat them with respect, they show up at the cinema, right? They show
Well,
up.
I mean, and we have great examples of that. Iron Lung, Amazing Digital Circus, Backrooms, Obsession. Those are all examples of what you just talked about. Independent filmmakers who literally built their audience and then brought them to the cinema, which Letterboxd actually gives you the opportunity to do. But speak to me really quickly about, okay, so you raised a decent amount of money for legal fees and to basically set up the bid itself. But what
Right.
is your strategy from this point forward? I got asked this point blank by someone just 2 days ago.
Yeah.
What is your strategy for competing with a multiple tens of millions of dollars bid? Where are you getting those funds from? And then how does that turn into the exit to the community?
The beauty of our model, right? The beauty of this community ownership model and the coalition model is that we are able to take funding, to take investment, to take donations from multiple stakeholders with different motivations who all have the same goal. The advantage for us in fundraising is that we have a goal that a lot of people share, but they need different avenues for getting there. Some impact institutional investors want to make an equity investment, but it's an impact equity investment where they're not expecting us to 20 exit in 3 years. They want to see sustainability, a profit, right? They want to see those things. They want to see good business fundamentals for sustainable industry. So we have a path for them. We also have a path for people who care about the industry and want to make smaller retail investments, equity investments in what we're doing. And they're doing it because they understand, as filmmakers, that they're investing in the future of their own careers. We also have a path for small dollar investments. The reason that we raised the money on the Seed and Spark, which I've talked about before, we raised the legal fund so that we can open up what's called a Reg CF round on WeFunder. And the Reg CF means specifically that unaccredited investors can participate.
Without
Really,
having to go through the stock market or do an IPO, you can go
exactly.
directly to the individual investors themselves.
Exactly. The only way that the SEC allows companies to raise money from unaccredited investors, which means people who don't have huge amounts of assets, right? That or big salaries. Unaccredited investors can only participate through one of these specific licensed platforms. We work with WeFunder because they are also a public benefit corporation and they're an amazing partner in all of this. They have taken it from the beginning, taken it totally seriously. When I said that you guys are amazing for startup capital, I think you can also be amazing as an exit strategy. And they've been unbelievable partners in this. So by working, what we needed to raise the Seed and Spark money for is that still requires, you have to pay lawyers to write up disclosures,
Right.
to ensure that everybody knows what the investment is, you have to have a financial audit, you have to pay accountants to create the, right? There are all of these fees
Before you
incorporated
can even get into the bidding process.
before you even start, right? Before you can even get out of the gate, you have to pay a significant amount of money to do all of these things. And that's why we needed to raise the money on the Seed and Spark. And we did it because we communicated to our community that this matters. This is going to be a transformational operational change for all of our careers. And that's why we targeted filmmakers specifically instead of targeting the Letterboxd users in that base, because filmmakers have skin in this game. Their future of their careers actually depends on this. Letterboxd users, it's not necessarily their careers that depend on it. They love it. They
Their
contribute to
community, yeah, it's a passion
the
for them.
community. Right. But
But
filmmakers,
they will be able to get into the Red CF round if they
yeah,
choose to. They want to put money in, but in that
exactly.
case, it's a passion investment. You're not necessarily expecting a return on the investment. You want to see the property succeed. You want to see. It's like the Veronica Mars Kickstarter.
Yeah.
You don't expect to own a piece of the movie. You just want to see the movie, right?
And to be very clear, Letterboxd is already profitable and we plan to make it more profitable, right? This isn't a charity play. That is an
Right.
important thing to say, but there's a
Which is boggling that Tiny wants to unload it at this point. It's really about their own cash problems here.
well,
And
if I were Tiny though, I'd be looking at it and saying that if their investment thesis requires them to make a 5x return on what they paid 2.5 years ago, that it is a good time to capitalize in the AI bubble before it bursts. Right. I mean, so I don't think so. Actually, all of that to me is logically coherent, even though I disagree with it. It's logically coherent. I think that the really
yeah, no, it does. It makes theoretical sense,
Mhm.
but they also don't seem to realize that they need the founders in order to transact. The founders have a veto power here. Is that correct? Am I stating that correctly?
So that is certainly what has been reported in the press over and over again. It seems like every time the press
I'm actually going to give you the Letterbox direct quote from this. As
okay.
Letterbox has grown, it's natural that there'll be interest in what we do next. Any decisions about its future will involve founders Matthew Buchanan and Carl von Rando. So they put that out. I'm imagining that means, and everything I've seen is that they have absolute veto power, which fits the Tiny's original thesis, which is founder led and all that kind of stuff. So we'll see what happens. But Lauren, I'm interested in what you think. So you see the various potential bidders here, right, and buyers here, and then you see Intrinsic and Elizabeth's public benefit corporation and the exit to community and the community based power here. How do you feel the value of Letterbox will be enhanced or detracted by Intrinsic versus, let's say, a big corporate monster who may be just looking to cash in on the AI metadata?
Well, first off, I don't have a horse in this race. I'm just reading the data, and I think Elizabeth's path scores highest on the one gate every other business or buyer struggles with, and that's community credibility. I think the honest challenge is the capital stack. That lane is financing dependent. And then the corpus licensing itself that funds it needs professional product execution. Abandoning that part of the asset portfolio is a huge miss. Also, to your point, Evan, unlocking its value today also is a short sell on what it could become down the line. And I think, my question for Elizabeth, I think, is the one I'd ask any bidder, which is, if the deal closed tomorrow, what product signals would tell users in 90 days, like which trajectory the new owner actually picked? Like that to me is like the next move kind of sets up what could happen or how the community would respond. And we identified that really as like the gate four that any bidder would have to pass.
Well, and the idea that you're exiting to community, I think, sends an interesting signal. Ted, yeah, I'm curious, definitely weigh in here, but I'm also curious as to what you think will happen if one of these other corporate bidders winds up winning the day.
Before getting to that, devastating holocaust of a reality possibility, let's say. First is think of the other first step, which is how this podcast, other things, energize the community, and what that evolved community starts to be able to do. Let Look at something that had community appeal, like Spirit Airlines, that in such a short amount of time was able to generate 300 million, and they didn't have a subscriber network, they just had a customer base, right? So with 30 million users on Letterbox or subscribers, and folks that are driven by passion, this is the point in culture right here, the inflection point where we want to be able to look back and say, this is where we decided, yeah, we were mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. Open your windows, scream out, to the
Reveal.
folks. This is our network moment, or at least the start of them that Elizabeth has generated, because that if that's assuming that looking at different things, it's too big for these companies to resist, right? It's been reported how Letterbox has one of the lowest, if not the lowest, return on customer pricing, right? Where, I'm not an expert on this, but I believe I got this from Daniel Paris's Stat Significant site, where Letterboxd was returning about $2.20 per subscriber, and the industry average is over $20. So private equity looks at that and says, "Wow, all we
There's a
have
lot
to
of
do,
upside here. Yeah,
yeah,
right. Just
we're
raise
going to
prices.
win. Let's go hard on that." But the fact is, I'm sure Tiny was thinking the same thing, right? And no one out there is an idiot. These are professionals that know what they're doing. The bankers and their pricing, no, for all of Lauren's, good work and analysis there. These people do know what they're doing. They definitely, one presumes, notice things like, behavioral reveals and all of that, and they try to use this to set their pricing. But at the same time, this is not easy to build, and this wasn't the intent of Letterbox from the beginning. It was the community from the beginning, right? So what the community can do, if they actually get a say this time, is decide what really benefits them, as opposed to what we see happens when private equity gets involved. I've worked at super big tech companies, and I've seen how long it takes to turn that ship around. The tech stack of any of these companies, it's all built on antiquated, uh, tools, right? And
Yeah.
it's not easy to flip this around. Or the fact is,
Yeah, I
Tiny
mean,
was
you worked at one of the biggest companies in the history of the world, Amazon, and you saw that despite the fact that this is a big tech company, it's very difficult for them to move tech. Actually,
yeah.
it takes the roadmaps and the funnels and all the things that, if you've ever worked in a tech company, you're in line behind everybody else. And the retail environment at Amazon is paramount. And then you see what they did to Box Office Mojo, Without a Box, IMDb, which is really remove the relevance, take out
And
the person.
how hard it is to deliver a good, user experience, a good interface on the video and all that. That's not easy to deliver, you know.
Yeah.
Uh,
I am going to remind people, put questions in the chat. We've got one here from Dodie for Elizabeth. What was the cost of that prep? What was that initial tranche of money that you raised, and how much did it cost just to get everything up and running into the bidding process?
So if we
If
were
you
to
don't mind
start
me
factoring, yeah, if we were to start factoring in the fact that I've been doing this for 2 years.
for
So
free.
I've been doing it for 2 years for free, right? Exactly. Is an important, not just for free, at cost. I've been paying myself to do it. I've been paying out so I could do it for 2
Yeah.
years. In terms of the legal fees, right? There are tens of thousands of dollars of legal fees, accounting fees, all of that. So we are quickly spending down every penny that we have had. We have been really grateful that we have actually received a chunk of that in-kind donations. So we've had attorneys and people who have said, we want to make sure you can keep going. So we're going to keep helping you, Ted. We're going
Ted
to
is
keep
Ted is
I didn't
advising.
submit my $1,000 an hour billable, invoice.
and
No
that's
plan
where
to either.
that's where all of this comes to, right? I said before the thing about we are operationalizing the sentiment that has been there in the industry. The reason it hasn't been operationalized before is because it's exceptionally expensive. It's actually going to cost a lot, like more than we raised in order to do it. But the reason that we're going to be able to is because we have a team of people who are volunteering their time and efforts to do this because we believe in it so passionately. So that's how our numbers look. As far as what you were saying before about the idea, I want to ask a question here in terms of, as we talk about this idea of like that it would be a shame to leave value on the table, and what could the value be, and what could be out there, right? All of those things. The question that I want to ask is, are we aiming for an extractive model, or are we aiming for a regenerative model? Because if you take an extractive model approach and you look at businesses and you look at industries and you say, well, how much money could we possibly earn? And would it be a shame if we left any of that on the table? And so you accept at face value the assumption that leaving any conceptual amount of money on the table would be a shame. And so therefore you have to organize your entire business strategy around that. I reject that on principle, right? I reject that on principle. And I think that it's the wrong way to think about business. It's certainly the wrong way to think about a business that is a marriage of art and commerce, right? You cannot have one without the other. And they are positioned as being in combat with each other,
In
right? Like,
conflict. Yeah. No, absolutely. I
and they
think,
are
I mean,
mutually dependent.
and Ted mentioned this earlier. I mean, if Adam Smith were alive today, he wouldn't recognize capitalism as it currently exists.
Right.
Competition is not really the point anymore. And to your point, everything has to be growth for growth's sake. Like if the growth isn't triple digits and it's not double digits every quarter, then that's a failure.
Right.
And that's not
Every publicly traded company's product is their quarterly earnings statement.
100%.
That's the product. Right.
Yeah, no, they're not concentrated on consumer value, certainly, and they're not concentrated on long-term lasting brand value. They literally concentrated on the bottom line for the next quarterly earnings report. Ted, what were you going to say?
I think we all need to ask ourselves, how can we have a role in transforming that? Because everyone I know in the film business entered it because they love movies,
Right. Not
And
because they love business, because they love movies.
And I would say they all felt at a time, regardless of whether it was a Spielberg movie or French existentialist new wave film or a horror film or anything, they actually recognized that movies can change our lives, right? That we can feel seen and heard and part of something bigger than ourselves. But what we've just kind of accepted it as a flow that comes to us. We don't start to ask, how do we get more of what we like? We're kind of like the white hair in Alice in Wonderland, right? Who's learned how to like what they get. We don't know how to say we should get what we like, right? And what Elizabeth is doing here is that transformation of trying to say 30 million of us love movies deeply. We volunteer so much information, sharing conversations across the globe. Isn't it time that we work to not lose that and use what we've done for the benefit of something bigger, right? That this can be done in capitalism. It's not a socialist
I think there's a really good case study, Lauren, that you worked on with Wrexham, which is, Ryan and Rob didn't get involved in that team because they thought they were going to make $1 billion. They got involved in that team because they love sport. They really fell in love with the town and wanted to provide value back to the fans and the town that had been really so downtrodden for so long. And the success is because it worked as a community, not because it worked as a brand. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great example. I mean, at the time, Wrexham was like a 5th-tier football club for $2.5 million.
Going down, yeah,
right, going down, right? But like when they talked about it, you heard they weren't talking about the team as the product. They were talking about the story, the origin, the culture, the songs they would sing. And that was the intangible value. And that is such a nice example, comparing it to what Elizabeth sees in this, which is the culture, the community. Ted, what you were talking through, like the user network effects, right? Of like writing, feeling, coming back, sharing it. And that is really hard to create new from. And so just like, with Wrexham, started a $2.5 million team, 5th tier, is now what, $400 million story. And I think,
and in the Premier League, or just about in the Premier League, right? Just about to get promoted. So Elizabeth, really quickly, how does the PBC structure, how's the Public Benefit Corporation structure reverse that? This is a great question from Tom Violet out there. What is the difference in this case? A, your investments can be made as a tax deductible donation, correct?
Yes.
But B, how does the corporation actually function and run differently from kind of a pure growth for growth's sake capitalist enterprise?
Yes, perfect. So I'll try to break this down as simply as possible, because this is where I get into like academic mode. I'll do my very best here. So any public benefit corporation has the legal ability to prioritize both social mission and seeking profit. A regular corporation, their legal responsibility is to maximize return to shareholder. You cannot legally you cannot give away $1 for your mission in a standard corporation. In our structure, in a public benefit corporation, you can do both. And it's for people who believe it is possible, not only possible to do both, but that they are mutually reinforcing, not mutually incompatible. So, what we have added to that, the intrinsic model that we have added to that, is a dual class stock structure in which early investors, equity investors, can provide startup capital to achieve a mission and to build a product for profit. And the exit mechanism for them to realize the return on their investment is by having these equity crowd funds in which you allow the members of the community to buy in as owners and take over the ownership of the corporation, so that when you start, right, you work with your investors, you offer them a profitable exit, all of those things. And then you allow the community that cares about it, that wants to steward it for long-term enterprise value, for sustainability, right? For all of those reasons, you allow them to become owners because they don't have the capital up front. That's the whole point of this, is that everyone who says the financing is the problem because the little guy doesn't have money, what we have created is a way for the little guy to partner with the big guy and have it work for everyone. That's what we've created. And so so in terms of how this works for our particular financing structure, what we have created is a coalition funding model in which people who want to give us people who have had a profitable year and say, listen, I don't want to invest, but I do want to give you a donation and write it off on my taxes, they can do that through our fiscal sponsor. People who want to make an equity investment and have what's called patient capital, which
They
is
have that option too.
they have the option. They can invest for a long-term sustainable enterprise value, right, in what we're doing and in the industry that we all care about. And then people like me who really only have $100 to invest, right? I don't have a bunch of money to invest in this. I personally am not an accredited investor, so I'm not even allowed to invest in this thing that I've designed per the SEC. I have to go through the Reg CF round, which
And
is
so just
here's 100.
so
And
just before we run out of time, what is next? What's the next step?
the next step is we'll be submitting our bid.
Which is when?
There are a lot of process details that I actually can't go into here, but we're putting our bid together.
So soon.
Soon.
We're
Ted, excited to talk to
everyone. Can't wait. A quick point too, in the bigger transformation that, Elizabeth is helping to launch here, for at least 20 years, I've been involved in, brainstorms, think tanks, consulting, advising the philanthropy class of film on what to do, right? And the structures that we have still are limited to individual projects, right? And you
Right.
hear the people complain that the system is broken, right? Those same philanthropists could build a better system. And this is where that opportunity sits right now, right? There's such a wealth in what Letterboxd has built in 30 million film lovers who engage with trust and confidence on that. And that will be lost if it isn't based around this structure that Elizabeth has devised and initiated, right?
And I think around independent film, around news, around a lot of the content continuum that is no longer working from a capitalist standpoint, from a business standpoint. Enterprises like this, moves like this, enlisting the community who gives a shit about the product or about the company or about the platform, allowing them to participate through a method like this feels like a truer version of capitalism as Adam Smith originally designed it, where the money from winning gets funneled back into the system so that new competition can thrive and we have fair market. That's not what we have. Certainly, that's not what we have in big tech right now. That's not what we have in big media right now. Elizabeth, thank you for, I don't know what motivated you to be this good a person and take this on. I really hope you succeed in this bid. and that Letterboxd is saved from the scrap heaps of Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, Without a Box, and Box Office Mojo. Ted, thank you for lending your legit legendary voice to this effort. Lauren, thank you for being the dispassionate, objective third party to come in here and give. I think it's the first time anybody's called you dispassionate, but
and adventureland.
you know,
well, I'll take it. I think in this case, it actually is a compliment. So
it is meant as one. And by the way, these are all great follows. Elizabeth on LinkedIn and on Substack. Ted Hope has one of the great fastest growing Substacks. Just displaced me from fastest growing top 10. Thank you, Ted. Yeah.
I didn't notice
on
that.
Substack. Lauren also has a Substack and a great LinkedIn feed. Follow her on her LinkedIn page, or look at Get Mark. It's an amazing, this little icon here you see here and all this was all a byproduct of advice that Lauren gave me. And I'm very loath to admit when someone else is right. So this has been a great conversation. Thank you for kicking off the inaugural Cartographers Log Live. I really, really appreciate you being here with us. Those who tuned in, over 120 people stayed the entire time. Thank you so much. This whole thing will be available on demand on Substack and on LinkedIn and on YouTube. Tell a friend to check it out, and go get involved in Elizabeth's movement. Go help her out. Go help her win this from the big corporate media machines. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week.
Thanks, Evan.